Chapter 19. Pansy's Perjury. Pansy thought the sensation coursing through her was pain. Yes, that was it. Her knees ached from pressing into the gravel for what felt like an eternity, and her sprained ankle throbbed with a relentless pulse. Yet, the pain seemed distant, unable to truly break through. For a while now, she had felt almost numb, barely registering the chaotic voices swirling around her. Blood traitor scum, tell us where they've gone. Pansy turned her gaze blankly toward the figure thrashing and kicking on the gravel. It was a red-headed woman, the mother of the Weasleys. Her limbs were contorted in a way that looked unnatural, and blood stained her sleeve. Nearby, her husband and son were pleading, their frantic voices mingling with the smoky air. Madame Lestrange, panted an ash-smeared Auror. The couriers arrived with the Veritaserum. Bellatrix Lestrange raised her wand, breaking the curse, and misses. Weasley slumped to the ground, insensible and gasping. Good. Bellatrix spat, her gaze venomous as it swept over the 7 others still kneeling in a line on the gravel. Well, 6 were kneeling. Oliver would lay unconscious to Pansy's left, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth. Pansy couldn't help but wonder if he was dying. Earlier, she had walked past a dead man whose skin had been burned in so many shades that he resembled a grotesque quilt. She glanced back up at Bellatrix, whose dress robes were singed and torn, her dark hair a wild mess, as chaotic as the smoke surrounding them. Pansy knew she should look away. One didn't stare at Bellatrix Lestrange, the Dark Lord's right hand. Yet, strangely, she felt no fear, nor did she feel defiant. Since the battle, she had felt almost nothing at all. She hadn't panicked when Rodolphus Lestrange had dragged her from the crowd, snarling accusations about her betrayal and her role in helping them escape. He hadn't felt anger when he had thrown her to the ground, wedged between Wood and the Pruitt woman. Pansy should have been horrified to find herself alongside blood traitors like them, but all that high emotion had faded away, like a flame that had burned itself out. At the other end of the line, the Aurors were starting to administer Veritaserum, their voices laced with curses and mutterings about memory charms. Pansy wasn't really paying attention. Her friends stood 10 feet away on the grass, looking like strangers, even Greg, tall and thick-necked, with a shiny burn blistering the side of his neck. Greg, whom she had known since childhood. Greg, whose father had been carried off on a stretcher, unresponsive. Vincent was trying to say something to him, but Greg wasn't answering. Then there was Theo. He was watching Pansy, his hair dusted gray with ash. "What do you think?" he had murmured to her before the speech was supposed to begin. "Want to stay and hear about what good members of society we are? Or we could go back to mine. Dad won't be away from all this for a couple more hours." It had been an offer of forgiveness, after her behavior in Draco's room. Theo was always quick to forgive her, but Pansy never felt grateful for it. She didn't want cycles of anger and absolution. She wanted the kind of innate understanding that felt as natural as breathing. She had thought she could find that with Theo, given enough time, but perhaps that was wishful thinking. Their relationship had always been tumultuous, lash and backlash, a dance of mutual sensitivity. Nothing like Blake. For a brief moment, her gaze strayed to the smoldering wreck of Malfoy Manor. A sharp pang hit her, like a stiletto knife between her ribs. Suddenly, 2 figures crunched to a halt in front of her, an Auror with delicate features twisted in anger, and a scribe clutching a quill and parchment. Before Pansy could react, the Auror grasped her chin, wrenched her mouth open, and shook 3 clear vials in front of her. Drops from a vial onto Pansy's tongue. The effect is instantaneous. Thoughts of the manor and of him evaporate, leaving Pansy's mind a hollow chamber. The closest sensation she'd experienced to this potion was during the Imperious Curse in her 4th year. That had felt hazy and dreamlike, a comforting relief. But this was harsh and depersonalizing. She felt like a book waiting to be read, a stack of documents to sift through. There was nothing left of her except what she could provide them. The scribe knelt beside her, his quill moving swiftly to create a transcript. "You're Pansy Parkinson 17? The Auror asked, her eyes piercing into Pansy. The truth rolled off her tongue, almost gravitational. "Yes, Ms. Parkinson," the Auror continued coldly. "Your responses to these questions will be used in your hearing with the Wiesengemot. Are you allied with the organization known as the Order of the Phoenix?" "No." The Auror hesitated. "Do you have any information about any plans, secrets, or workings of the Order of the Phoenix?" "No." "You attended Hogwarts with the mudblood Hermione Granger. Has she contacted you in any way since then?" "No." The Auror's frown deepened. She exchanged a glance with the scribe, who muttered, Another memory charm, perhaps? She didn't run with the others, the aura noted. She'd have had to cast it on herself. Get her wand from Runcorn, and try Priori in Canada. The scribe nodded and strode back into the smoky night. Hardly a minute later, he returned, shaking his head. No obliviation. The aura turned her dark, piercing gaze back on Pansy. But you did cast Aguameni tonight alongside members of the Order of the... Another voice broke in. It was only that one spell. The aura rounded on Theo, who had stepped out from the group gathered on the grass. At first, she seemed ready to snap. But then her gaze landed on Mr. Not, standing not far from his son, instantly recognizable. She cleared her throat and said curtly, "Quiet, please. This record will be used in court for..." "We were with her the whole night, though," Greg interjected, emboldened by Theo's presence. "She was on our side the entire fight. It was only one spell." Millicent and Crab remained silent, Crab's eyes darting toward his father. After a moment, Blaze nodded in agreement. "It's true," he added. "Maybe she just wanted to escape. We were all trying to by then." Distantly, Pansy felt a wave of gratitude toward Theo, Greg, and Blaze. That gratitude snagged in her mind, a flicker of clarity breaking through the haze. Yes, there was a reason she wanted to address the circumstances, but what was it? The stark simplicity of the truth trembled within her. "Pansy, stop. Stop." Draco's voice echoed in her mind. Instead of fading like an echo, it amplified, slicing through the emptiness created by the Veritaserum. Draco, alive for the past 7 months, apparently working for the Order of the Phoenix. Draco, the one who had made her feel like a moon cast adrift, searching for a new anchor, finding nothing but emptiness. She felt as if her entire head had jolted, like she'd been struck by a heavy object. Lucid thoughts surged into the void of her mind. Soon, the Aura would ask why Pansy had helped the Order escape, and she would have to confess that Draco was alive. A traitor to the Death Eaters, he would be hunted down and killed. The potion pressed against her thoughts, attempting to clear them away, but Pansy resisted. No, she thought, something igniting within her. No. Part of her wanted to scream and rage at Draco for letting her believe he was dead, but she could never betray him. "It's true," the Aura said slowly, "that you spent the earlier part of the battle fighting against Granger and her accomplices?" "Yes. Yet you admit you broke ranks to cast the Aguameni charm?" "Yes," Pansy replied. A tangled web of thoughts began to form in her mind, slow and foggy, yet resolute. She searched for a way to obscure the truth. The effort felt excruciating, like forcing her hand over a flame, but she knew she could maintain some control as long as she stayed within the parameters of honesty. Strategy, she reminded herself. Throughout her life, Pansy had been taught to think strategically. Her parents had always assessed her strengths, much like breeders evaluating a thoroughbred. "Not the brightest," they'd told her when she was 8 or 9, "but you have more drive than others, and that's always useful." In her 4th year, they'd said, "Not the most beautiful, but you're confident, and confidence is appealing. It makes people trust you." This was the way to the life she desired, to understand herself and wield that knowledge like a weapon. No, she couldn't lie under Veritaserum. But at 17, she knew she looked like a fragile, trembling wreck in the tattered remnants of her dress robes. Still, those could serve as weapons in their own right. She could see a way forward, though it would be a painful path to navigate. Yes, she would tell the truth. She would reveal so much truth that it would obscure the only truth that truly mattered. "Is your friend correct?" the Aura pressed. "Did you cast the charm to escape the manor yourself?" "No." "Then tell me." Cold anger seeped back into the Aura's voice. "Why did you help the Order escape?" "Because of Draco," Pansy said. "Draco," the Aura echoed. "He was the Malfoy's son," the scribe interjected, his quill scratching across the page of its own accord. "That boy who died at Hogwarts in May." "What does he have to do with it?" the Aura demanded. "I've had nightmares almost every night since his funeral," Pansy said, her voice still flat and monotone. "I wake up and see him in the dark. I see him everywhere. Every time I walk into the Slytherin common room, or sit down in the Great Hall to eat, it feels like he's still there. My friends and I sometimes try to joke about him haunting us, but it never felt like a joke to me. I felt like part of him has been close the whole time, angry with me. Sometimes I talk to him in my head. We have entire conversations, even. I tell him about my day, and I imagine what he says back. I can hear his voice when I do." And it was all true. Pansy had done these things, half blind with rage and grief, lying catatonic on her bed during the summer, making herself sick at Hogwarts just to avoid going to classes. She had spent most of the past 7 months wandering through dark tunnels in her mind, replaying the last time she'd seen Draco, how she'd given him a cold look of disgust during their argument, and how he hadn't seemed to care. The aura didn't interrupt Pansy. The hard glint in her eyes had softened, and her eyebrows were raised in curiosity as the scribe's quill moved swiftly across the parchment, capturing every word. "I didn't want to come tonight," Pansy continued. "I told everyone it was because the gala would probably be filled with boring speeches. But the truth is, I didn't want to be back at the manor. I knew it would be worse than ever. And I was right. It was awful. I kept crying in the bathroom, telling the others I was fixing my dress. Earlier, we were up in his room, and it still smelled like him. I couldn't shake the memory of his body in that coffin. Then, during the battle, I heard him. Draco. He spoke to me through the body of a middle-aged man, one of the accomplices. He had a big black beard, curly hair, and blue eyes. I cast the Agmamendi because I wanted to keep talking to him. I tried to find him outside, but I ended up spraining my ankle coming down the steps. I just want to see him again." Pansy felt a tightness in her body, as if her skin was shrinking around her frame. She hadn't exactly lied, but there was a metallic taste in her mouth. The potion was attuned to misdirection. It sensed her stretching against its constraints. The aura raised her eyebrows, a mix of annoyance and pity replacing the anger that had been there before. "You," heard your dead friend's voice coming from a middle-aged man. "What did he say?" "He said, 'Pansy, stop, stop.' That's all. Just 3 words." "Yes." The aura exchanged a glance with the scribe, and for a brief moment, Pansy felt a flicker of victory. The hardest part was over. She had planted the seed of her story. If they questioned her sanity, reinforcing that doubt would be easy. After all, no one sounded more insane than someone trying to prove they were sane. But before the aura could continue, another figure appeared. "And this one," came an imperious female voice. The Veritaserum jolted in Pansy's system. Fear quickly replaced her earlier emptiness as Bellatrix Lestrange stepped into view. The aura lowered her voice. "The girl only cast one spell to help Granger's group, Madame Lestrange. Both eyewitnesses and the Veritaserum confirm it. She doesn't seem quite right in the head. She believes the ghost of a dead friend possessed one of the attackers." Bellatrix curled her lip in disdain. "This is the Parkinson girl? The one whose parents are still rotting in Azkaban for their blunders, when they could have caught Harry Potter himself." The scribe offered a sycophantic chuckle. "Apparently not the brightest family around, Madame Lestrange." Ignoring him, Bellatrix's gaze lingered on Pansy's face. She crouched down, her singed robes fluttering in the night breeze. "Who is this dead friend, little Parkinson?" she crooned. "Draco Malfoy," Pansy replied. Pansy spoke, and a moment of silence followed, during which Bellatrix's malicious sneer became fixed in place. "You think my nephew's spirit was here tonight?" She mocked, though the taunt fell flat. "Yes," Pansy replied, her stomach churning. It was true in a sense. If Draco had been there, his spirit would be too. But the Veritaserum fought against her. It urged her to be more honest. I've answered the question, she thought, struggling against the potion's influence. "I've done what you want." Bellatrix's sneer faded, replaced by a burst blood vessel in her left eye that glowed like a red star. "She may have been placed under the Imperious curse," she said to the aura. "Legilimency can succeed where the potion fails." The aura cleared her throat. "That is irregular." Bellatrix's fingers tightened around her wand. "But of course," the aura added hastily, "whatever you see fit, Madame Lestrange." Without missing a beat, Bellatrix turned back to Pansy and hissed, "Legilimens." In an instant, Pansy found herself in the foyer, throwing herself against the Christmas tree with a cry as a spell whizzed past. She stumbled back through the branches, pine needles snagging in her hair. As she turned, she spotted her, Granger, distracted as she dueled Blaise and Theo. The opportunity was too good to pass up. Pansy didn't care about aiding the Death Eaters anymore, not after Draco, not after her parents. But she understood their currency. If she could capture Granger, she would be the hero of the night. With the Lestrange's favor, perhaps she could even secure her parents' release from Azkaban. She raised her wand. "Petrif! Pansy, stop!" The command hit her like a curse. Suddenly, the adrenaline that had coursed through her veins vanished. The sounds of battle dulled and faded away. Everything came to a standstill. Pansy spun around to face a stranger standing before her. He stood before her, tan-skinned, with a bristly black beard and curly hair framing a snub nose, his electric blue irises piercing. Clad in a catering uniform, he initially seemed unfamiliar, but the shape of his eyes tugged at her memory. "Stop," he commanded. In that moment, Pansy felt as though she had slipped over the edge of something deep and unsettling. "Dr. Drac. Descendo." Crab's voice rang out, breaking her concentration. An ornament tumbled from the teetering tree above, and Pansy dove out of the way, seeking refuge behind a ministry witch. When she glanced back, he was gone. Pansy jolted as Bellatrix yanked herself from her mind, leaving a sharp pain stabbing at her temple. The woman had been anything but gentle. Yet the effects of the Veritaserum still clouded her thoughts, forcing her to kneel in a haze of conflicting emotions. How well did Draco's aunt know his voice? Could she recognize it in just 4 syllables, as Pansy had? For a long moment, Bellatrix remained silent, her wand still poised, her expression unreadable. Then slowly she lowered her wand. "The ravings of a lunatic child," she said coldly to the aura beside her. Yet her disloyalty enabled what we witnessed tonight. The aura and scribe quickly nodded in agreement, suggesting light charges that would still convey the seriousness of such a betrayal. Bellatrix offered occasional, disdainful nods in response, but her gaze remained fixed on Pansy, devoid of disdain or dismissiveness. Instead, it held something far more dangerous, doubt. Meanwhile, Draco observed Hermione as she gently pulled the faded bedspread up to Ollivander's chin. "I can't think of anything else to do," she whispered, her voice trembling. Clearly, she feared he might not survive the night, and unfortunately, Draco thought that fear seemed all too rational. Ollivander's face resembled that of a wax doll, each shallow breath sounding like a death rattle. They had placed him in the guest room that had once been Draco's, and as the wandmaker's head sagged back against the pillows, the weight of the situation pressed heavily on them all. He found himself reluctant to leave the quiet moment behind. Hermione was still adjusting the bedspread, her fingers trembling slightly. He reached out, gently touching her wrist to still her movements. Even half an hour after their escape, the tension lingered in the air. Draco didn't say the words, "It's all right," or "Let him rest," but Hermione nodded as if he had. She stepped back from the bedside, and together, they slipped out into the dimly lit hallway. Faint murmurs drifted to them from the front room, where 5 Weasleys kept a vigil: Fred, George, Ginny, Bill, and Fleur. After operating to Shell Cottage, they had found not just Bill and Fleur, but also the 3 younger Weasleys, bags already packed and ready for action. "We were all at the Burrow for Christmas," Fred had said once they reached headquarters. "And good thing, too. Did that clock of yours give it away?" Potter had asked, nodding toward the clock that pointed to mortal peril. Fred sighed, his expression serious. "We've all been stuck on mortal peril for a year and a half, mate. The thing's all but useless now." "No, there was a broadcast of the gala band on the Wizarding Wireless. It went dead just before the speeches," George added. "About 10 minutes after that, they made an emergency announcement. Mentioned the order and everything." Fred grimaced. "We figured that just might constitute a family emergency. So we set the ghoul back to normal, grabbed our bags, and scarpered." "What about your aunt?" Hermione inquired, concern etching her features. Ginny tried to scoff lightly, though her pallor betrayed her unease. "Muriel old last week to say she's spending Christmas in a chateau in the south of France. She'll have the sense not to come back to Britain after this." Draco noticed that, like Pansy, Ginny bore the marks of recent struggles, cuts and bruises that told their own stories. Soon after, Harry and Luna had left to retrieve Luna's father, leaving everyone else at the cottage. Now, with their disguises removed and the wandmaker settled, Draco knew they should return to the Weasleys. Yet, he hesitated, unwilling to break the fragile peace that surrounded them. The thought filled him with reluctance. They had already spent 15 minutes answering questions about the battle, Ron's disappearance, and the fates of Percy and the Weasley parents. Draco felt utterly exhausted, and the palpable suspicion from their guests only added to his fatigue. He could still smell the smoke from the burning manor, its remnants a stark, white-hot crown atop the hill. A sudden crack echoed from the front room, causing both him and Hermione to jump. They hurried down the hallway, and as they entered the front room, they saw Potter had returned with Luna. Her father was nowhere in sight. "He wasn't there," Luna whispered, her voice trembling. Even in the confines of Malfoy Manor, she hadn't sounded this frightened. Potter looked hollow, as if the weight of the world rested on his shoulders. "He's been gone a couple of days. We found a letter from Bellatrix on the counter. It said they had Luna and instructed us to meet Travers and Selwyn in Diagon Alley for instructions. They must have taken him then. An uncomfortable silence settled over the room. It seemed none of the others could think of anything to say to comfort Luna, fully aware of the horrors Bellatrix had inflicted upon her, all for mere amusement. Draco privately assessed the old man's situation as grim. Yet, there was one glimmer of hope to cling to. "The Death Eaters still want something from your father," he said, lingering in the hallway, keeping a few paces away from the others. When he spoke, all 8 pairs of eyes turned to him, and he fought the urge to flinch. The cramped space of headquarters felt even smaller. "That's what will keep him safe," he continued, leaning against the wall. "They need him to print their stories in that magazine. They can't afford to hurt him too badly, or he won't be able to go back to work." "Is that your expert opinion, Malfoy?" Ginny asked coolly, her tone sharp. Heat flooded Draco's face. There it was, the confirmation that the Weasleys, just like Ron, would only ever see a Death Eater when they looked at him. He opened his mouth to respond, but before he could find the right words, Hermione intervened. "Draco's part of the Order, Ginny. He nearly died helping us tonight," Hermione said hotly. The Weasleys turned to her, surprised. Ash from the battle was tangled in her hair, and her lips formed a nearly invisible line. Ginny glanced at Harry, who nodded in agreement. "Draco's been on our side for a while now, so..." Harry raised his eyebrows at Ginny and the twins. "Leave it, all right?" Fred, George, and Ginny exchanged dubious looks before shrugging in reluctant unison. Harry turned back to Luna. "I reckon he's right. As long as they need your dad, he'll be okay." Luna considered this. It's true that keeping a magazine at such high circulation is very difficult. Much more than most people would think. As she spoke about the Quibbler's humble beginnings, the tension in the room began to ease. Hermione gave Draco a faint but encouraging smile, and the irritated heat faded from his face. He felt a sense of stability return. Her words lingered in his mind. Draco's part of the Order. It was true, he realized, but he hadn't fully grasped it until now. The events of the night had drained him completely, and for a moment, the thought echoed in his mind. "I'm a member of the Order of the Phoenix." He'd helped establish a new headquarters, assisted in retrieving 2 Horcruxes. He had been part of the underground resistance long before any of these 5 Weasleys. For months, he had been working to undermine Lord Voldemort. Draco's thoughts churned like choppy water before a storm, and for a moment, he didn't understand why. Then it hit him. He had thought the Dark Lord's name. He rolled it through his mind again, testing the weight of it. Something about the battle had numbed him to that name. He had fought against Voldemort's forces and survived. For the first time since the beginning of this dark year, Draco felt a small, quiet pulse of pride. He looked around the front room at the new warder, feeling a sense of belonging begin to blossom within him. Saw the lines drawn between them all. Despite their initial suspicions and reluctance, the Weasleys had welcomed Draco into their home. He had made the first move to rescue Luna, who, in turn, had helped Ginny, Harry, and Hermione in the Department of Mysteries. In a twist of fate, Hermione had saved him, and he had saved her. They were all inextricably linked. Now, the only thing left to do was wait for news about the others, the people who had stood by Draco in the heat of battle, unlike the Death Eaters who had betrayed him. 7 dead, dozens injured in Christmas catastrophe. Arson attack leaves Malfoy Manor in ruins. A joyful Yuletide celebration turned into a nightmare on Tuesday, as anti-ministry radicals launched a ruthless attack during the Ministry of Magic's first annual Christmas gala for the celebration of magical unity. "It was supposed to be an evening of holiday cheer," said Algernon Wolflaw of the Office of Domestic Affairs, speaking from his bed at St. Mungo's Hospital for Magical Maladies and Injuries, where he and 37 others are currently being treated for burns and injuries sustained during the attack. "I don't understand what kind of person could do this to a party full of innocent people." Readers need not wonder any longer. The Daily Prophet can now reveal, based on hundreds of eyewitness accounts, including this reporter's, that the attack was orchestrated by Hermione Granger, the mudblood who ranks second on the ministry's undesirables list. "We believe," stated Minister for Magic Pius Thickness in an address to a terrified nation early Wednesday morning, that Granger was acting under the orders of Harry Potter, the disturbed individual now infamously known as the murderer of Albus Dumbledore. While Granger is primarily known for her association with Potter, she has her own history of ruthlessness, having cursed a fellow student at Hogwarts School with semi-permanent disfigurement when she was just 16. Her assault on Malfoy Manor was aided by a dozen members of the subversive organization known as the Order of the Phoenix, have been implicated in the attack. For detailed profiles of the assailants, please refer to page 2. Together, these attackers set fire to celebratory banners and used defenseless members of a crowd of nearly 1,000 as shields against the Greengrass Guard, who had been hired for event security. Although Orus attempted to assist the guard by extinguishing flames, evacuating guests, and reviving unconscious victims, they were unable to prevent the evening's tragic climax. The burning of Malfoy Manor, a 17th-century residence of immense historical significance to Wizarding Britain. Survivors report that Hermione Granger cast the Fiendfire curse, which ultimately caused the irreparable damage. Official estimates place the value of the destroyed manor and its hundreds of historic artifacts at over 6.5 million galleons. However, the greatest loss lies in the 7 brave souls who lost their lives while trying to thwart the attack. Among the deceased are 3 Aurors and 4 members of the Greengrass Guard, aged between 24 and 58. Tragically, MetaWizards anticipate that the death toll may rise, as 9 other victims remain in critical condition at St. Mungo's. Most of the deceased leave behind children and spouses. For full obituaries, see page 4. While Granger and 4 accomplices managed to escape the scene, readers may find some solace in knowing that 8 others were captured and interrogated under Veritaserum, yielding partial success. Some of the attackers had placed memory charms on each other before their capture, presumably to conceal dangerous plots still to come. Orrors suspect this tactic was orchestrated by Sturgis Podmore, a veteran with decades of experience in the Obliviation squads. Experts in legilimency and memory extraction are scheduled to interrogate the captured assailants in the coming weeks. This attack has also unveiled a shocking web of deceit within one of the oldest pureblood families in the country. Among those captured are Molly, Percy, and Arthur Weasley, with the latter 2 of whom are former Ministry employees. When Orrors contacted the Weasley family's connections within an hour of the incident, they discovered that the family had already fled, likely aware of their relatives' sinister intentions. The following individuals are now wanted for immediate questioning and are considered dangerous. Muriel Weasley, a former Mudblood rights activist. Bill and Fleur Weasley, known affiliates of Goblin groups. Ginevra and Ronald Weasley, the latter of whom was last seen highly contagious with Spattergroit. And joke shop owners Fred and George Weasley, for an investigation into the mysterious sources of Mr. and Mr. Weasley's funding, see page 12. The Auror office urges the public to stun any of these individuals upon sight and to contact the authorities immediately. In a nighttime session held just hours after the attack, the Wisengamot voted unanimously to convict all but one of the accused on 7 counts of accessory to murder, 38 counts of magical injury, 1 count of aggravated arson, and related charges of premeditated assault. Each of these convicts received multiple life sentences in Azkaban. The remaining defendant, Ms. Pansy Parkinson, who is just 17, was convicted on the lesser charge of accessory to mayhem and is to serve 6 months. This leniency was granted due to several factors. Her young age, reports that her only assistance to the attackers was a water conjuration spell, and her evidently unstable mental state. Young purebloods like Ms. Parkinson must unite during times like these, the minister advised at a press conference following his address. We must remain vigilant to avoid straying from the right path. As we know, mudbloods have manipulated purebloods for centuries to position themselves as legitimate users of magic. If tonight has taught us anything, it's that Potter and his supporters will manipulate, slaughter, and stop at nothing to dismantle the society we cherish. As the press conference shifted focus to Harry Potter, the minister proceeded to unveil information that was perhaps more shocking than anything else revealed that evening. As has been extensively covered in these pages, Potter. 2 years ago, he broke into the Department of Mysteries, where he destroyed vital information about his past contained in a prophecy. This lost prophecy was also sought after by the infamous wizard known as He Who Must Not Be Named. Renowned for his extraordinary magical abilities, He Who Must Not Be Named was responsible for a series of attacks decades ago, though none as devastating or senseless as the events of Tuesday. According to a recent report by the Daily Prophet, Ministry archivists have uncovered that the lost prophecy did not concern the downfall of He Who Must Not Be Named, as had been assumed for many years. Instead, it foretold the rise of a terrifying new power, one that would come of age to bring about the destruction of the wizarding world. Experts are now gravely concerned that Harry James Potter may be the subject of this ominous prediction. They speculate that he who must not be named sought to make the prophecy public to clear his name, illustrating why he attempted to eliminate the boy once affectionately known as the boy who lived. Certainly, the minister concluded, the days of the First Wizarding War were fraught with turmoil, and you know whose methods were rightfully viewed as extreme. However, in light of researchers' recent findings regarding the insidious nature of mudbloods, we must entertain the possibility that you know who acted out of a protective instinct for the future of magic itself. Now, following Potter's horrifying attack on hundreds of innocents, the contents of the prophecy seem increasingly foreboding. The ministry and Wizarding Britain as a whole must reevaluate what has always seemed so certain about you-know-who's role in these historical events. The Minister for Magic departed the stage shortly thereafter, assuring reporters that they would be kept informed about the evolving situation. Yet, questions linger in the aftermath of this revelation. Could it be that, for decades, the wizarding world has shunned and feared its only chance at survival? Might it be possible that he who must not be named is destined to defeat the boy who lived and bring an end to the attacks like the one they had just experienced? Only time will tell. For now, the wizarding world must mourn its losses and hope that none of the victims at St. Mungo's succumb to their injuries. Well-wishers can find addresses to send cards and condolences on page 11. For the complete transcripts of the Minister for Magic's speech and press conference, see pages 6 to 7. For exclusive coverage of He Who Must Not Be Named's groundbreaking research in experimental transfiguration during the 1960s, see pages 8 to 9. It was a testament to the gravity of the situation that no one in the front room protested as Hermione read the article. Instead, the silence deepened with each word she spoke. By the time she finished, her voice quivered with rage and disgust. Finally, she threw the newspaper down, revealing the stunned faces of those around her. Fred and George lounged in their armchairs. Luna sat at the far end of the sofa. Ginny and Harry stood by the empty hearth, while Bill and Fleur occupied a couple of uncomfortable chairs pilfered from the dining room. Draco leaned against the wall, still keeping his distance from the group. It was Christmas Eve, yet dawn had yet to break. None of them had slept a wink. They had remained in the front room, tuning the wireless all night, waiting for one of the others to appear as if by some miracle. But no one had come. Instead, they had to wait for the prophet, delivered reliably to the house across the village. Now, 7 people were dead because of Crabbe's fiend fire, and the entire wizarding world believed they were responsible. Her responsible. Mass murderer Hermione Granger. That's how she would be remembered, just as Sirius had been. She reread the words about multiple life sentences in Azkaban. Images flooded her mind. Wood's lifeless body misses. Weasley's arm torn open by a cutting hex, crimson soaking through her patched dress robes, and Angelina, who wasn't even part of the order, turning to urge them to run too. They can go home to save themselves? The black text blurred and twitched as tears of frustration filled her eyes. Percy, Fred said with a hollow laugh. Can you believe it? Percy, sentenced to life in Azkaban. Yeah, George mumbled. He really picked the perfect moment to stop being the biggest prat in the known universe, didn't he? At least Mum and Dad got to see him choose the right side, Ginny whispered. Her long red hair was pulled back in a ponytail, one arm resting on the mantel, her fingers tapping in a regular rhythm on the old wood. The heavy silence settled over the room. Then Luna spoke, her tone somewhat absent. The memory charms were a very good idea. Harry nodded in agreement. That's true. It seems to have kept the last of the Order safe so far. If McGonagall or Hagrid were identified, that would make big news. Bad influence on the Sprods, George added. Weak smiles flickered around the room, looking more like facial cramps than anything genuine, but Hermione felt a small lift in her spirits. I'll do some reading on memory charms, she said. I'm sure it will bring us all some peace of mind to learn more. What is it you hope to know? Fleur asked. In France, we have developed many varieties of memory charm. At Beauxbatons, we learn about them from a young age. Her gaze was as forceful and lofty as ever. Hermione had never been particularly fond of Fleur, always considering her a bit full of herself. But after tonight, she found herself reconsidering. Fleur had drawn no attention to herself all evening, hadn't complained of fatigue, and had offered words of comfort to the Weasleys. She somehow maintained perfect posture in that uncomfortable chair, as if resolved to be a bastion of order in the room. And even when Hermione had made a terrible batch of tea around 4 a.m., Fleur hadn't grimaced at all when she took a sip. Well, Hermione said, They mentioned that everyone would be interrogated over the coming weeks. Will it really be weeks before? Can the Death Eaters break through the memory charms? Fleur pondered for a moment before responding. That will depend on the charm itself. This Sturgis, if he is a professional and has done his job well, then yes, it may take quite a long time to uncover the entire truth. It will come in little pieces at first. For instance, if he removed the order meetings from Molly's mind, the first thing to re-emerge might be the color of the carpet in Grim Old Place, or a stroke of paint in that hideous painting of the screaming woman. Very small details, seemingly meaningless. She paused, gathering her thoughts. It will be like untying a knot. After that, it will come faster and faster, more and more, until, she snapped her fingers. It will all unravel like that, in the end. Bill casually slipped his hand into Fleur's. It's like most mind magic, Hermione. If you try to do too much too quickly, you compromise the contents. A lump rose in Hermione's throat as she tried to suppress thoughts of her parents. She longed for them to be there with her now, her father, gruff and awkward yet always ready to distract her with an interesting article, and her mother, eager to analyze her problems as if they were problematic molars. The idea of Wendell and Monica Wilkins compromising the true identities of Dominic and Celia Granger filled her with dread. She hated what she had done. Bill was loosening his long hair from its ponytail, running his fingers through it thoughtfully. Sturgis knows what he's doing. And if he's made Tonks's fake history look convincing enough, they might overlook her to focus on our parents and Sturgis, who they know are deeply involved with the Order. That's supposed to be a good thing? George interjected. Clearly agitated. Yeah, it is, Bill replied calmly. Because Mom and Dad don't know that much. The Order hasn't been operating since summer, and the less they know, the safer they are. Sturgis did this to buy us time on the outside. Now we're all here, and you can bet Remus and Kingsley will be on the move again, and McGonagall and Hagrid will be able to jump ship before the memory charms break, Bill said, trying to reassure them. Ginny's voice was sharp as she replied, So, you're saying it's fine that 8 people have been thrown in Azkaban? Bill looked at his sister, affection and sadness battling on his scarred face. Gin, Mum and Dad knew what they were signing up for. Harry interjected quietly, Angelina and Oliver didn't sign up for this. Neither did Pansy Parkinson, for that matter. I still can't figure out why she helped us, Fred chimed in. Yeah, and what was that about her being deranged? Hermione glanced at Draco, sensing there was more to the story. I said something to her, Draco muttered, only a couple of words, but, yeah, she knew it was me. What? George asked, looking bewildered. She saw you, and the Aurors just decided not to believe her, even though they gave her Veritaserum? Fred added. Hermione cleared her throat. Well, Veritaserum forces you to say what you believe is the truth, not necessarily the truth itself. Clearly, they thought she was mad to believe she'd seen the dead walking around in another body. Thank goodness for that. Silence fell over the group. Hermione had tried to speak with authority, but her own nerves were on edge. She hoped no one would dig too deeply into Pansy's supposed hallucination. More troubling was the thought of whether Sturgis had erased the Malfoys from Tonks's and the Weasleys' memories. Either way, Draco's secret couldn't stay hidden for much longer. Luna broke the silence, her chin resting on her hand as she frowned lightly. All that about you-know-who in the article, she mused. That was very odd. Harry sighed. I suppose they had to start polishing up his reputation at some point. He won't want to hide forever, and this is as good a reason as any for why we should suddenly trust Lord Voldemort. Hermione waited, the weight of their conversation hanging in the air. The room seemed to flinch at the mention of the name. Fred and George's expressions twitched, but that was all. Even Draco remained completely still. Their steadfastness in the face of the name somehow bolstered Hermione's resolve, prompting her to sit up straighter. It's all such rubbish, anyway, she said through gritted teeth, trying to pretend that everything Voldemort did was for some noble cause, as if he's been some misunderstood hero all along. No one with any sense will believe it. That's not even the dumbest part, Fred chimed in with a snort. It's just like the Chamber of Secrets all over again. Who's going to believe Harry is the real Dark Lord? Pathetic, really, George added, shaking his head. If he were actually going to be the single-handed downfall of the wizarding world, he would have gotten much better marks on his OWLS. A surprised laugh rippled through the room, and Hermione felt a wave of guilt wash over her in the aftermath. In the awkward silence that followed, she sensed the others felt it too. How could they laugh, even as they sat here, safe and whole? Their friends might be under the Death Eater's wands in Azkaban. They are alive, Fleur said, her expression resolute. Her eyes sparkled with determination. They are alive, she repeated more sharply. Your parents, and Tonks, Sturgis, these classmates of yours, we must fight for them out here. Mourning as if they had been killed will do nothing. She's right, Harry said, straightening his back. His gaze flickered to Hermione, and she knew he was thinking about the Horcrux locked away in his bedside table. We've got 10 of us here now, he amended. We're in touch with McGonagall, Hagrid, and Aberforth. We're going to start putting up a real fight. Here, here. Fred exclaimed, rising to his feet with a groan, maybe after a bit of shut-eye, though. Is anyone else absolutely knackered? I haven't been, tired for months, Fleur said, her vibrant expression dimming as she stifled a yawn and rose to her feet. Will Bill and I set up our tent in the front garden? Sure, Harry replied. Fred, George, we still have your tent, Luna, and Ginny, you can stay there too. With that, Bill and Fleur hurried out the front door, a rush of cold air following them. Harry led the remaining Weasleys and Luna down the hall toward the back garden, leaving Hermione and Draco alone in the dimly lit room. Hermione glanced up at him. They had washed away the remnants of the previous night's chaos, their bodies clean and sleek. But the shock still lingered in Draco's eyes. Had it really only been hours since they'd fled down the manor drive, his hand feverish and clammy in hers? I suppose I'm sleeping top to toe with Ollivander, am I? He said, his voice, usually so smooth, now raspy from the smoke they had inhaled, reminiscent of a gentle breeze through tall grass. She laughed, standing up and swaying slightly from fatigue. They naturally gravitated toward each other, but she hesitated before resting her head against his chest. Why did you do it? She murmured. Speak to Pansy, you must have known she'd recognize your voice. His hand, which had been stroking her hair, paused at the back of her head. Right into it, Granger, I thought we were supposed to sleep. She pulled back slightly. We can talk about it later. It's fine, he replied, though he seemed to be weighing something in his mind. A flicker of insecurity tugged at Hermione. They hadn't truly discussed his history with Pansy, just as they hadn't delved into her past feelings for Ron. Draco and Pansy had always seemed like a perfect match, as if they were crafted for each other. Pansy had certainly looked glamorous at the gala. Had Draco seen her and realized he still had unresolved feelings, then Draco muttered, I'm about to hex you. I told her to stop, that's all. As those words settled in, a strange, tingling sensation spread from the center of Hermione's body. Draco looked almost embarrassed, a faint pink hue coloring his cheeks. They both understood the consequences if Draco's secrecy were to unravel. They knew how the world would perceive him, a prime target for the Death Eaters, labeled a blood traitor, a defector, and ultimately, an undesirable. Yet even within the sanctuary of headquarters, he wasn't fully trusted. Caught between two worlds, he would soon find himself despised by both. After 7 months of careful avoidance, he had broken his silence to protect her. The realization overwhelmed Hermione, filling her with a mix of fear and admiration. It was an act he might have performed for his family. It reminded her of the truths she still needed to share with him. Let's get some sleep, Hermione suggested, leading him upstairs. Draco followed her without question. But as soon as her bedroom door closed, he realized the significance of this moment. Throughout December, despite their late-night conversations, they had never actually shared a bed. Their eyes met for a fleeting second, and even in his weariness, Draco felt a tension coil within him. They quickly busied themselves. Draco retrieved his wand from his pocket and placed it on the bedside table, while Hermione pulled back the bed covers. They extinguished the lamps and settled into bed, the old springs creaking beneath them. Both were already dressed in soft, inexpensive pajamas bought from a Muggle department store in a nearby town. The moonlight filtered through the blinds, casting a gentle glow as they pulled the covers up, facing each other in the darkness, just a foot apart. After a moment, their warmth began to mingle beneath the quilt, and Draco found himself relaxing for the first time in what felt like a week. Hermione was a mere shadow, her hair spread across the ivory pillowcase like dark cotton. "I have to tell you something," she began. Whispered, "I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner. It won't really matter for a few days, but..." "What is it?" "Your mother reached out to Mr. Weasley." Draco's shoulders tensed. "When? Where have they been?" "They left Kafkov Cottage in mid-August. After that, they went to London, and..." Hermione hesitated. Draco felt a wave of unease wash over him. "What?" She let out a small sigh. "They convinced a Muggle businessman that they were his long-lost friends who had tragically gone bankrupt. He's rented them a townhouse in one of the city's most upscale neighborhoods, and he's at their beck and call, doing whatever they ask." Draco stared at her in disbelief, an unfamiliar sensation pulling at his insides, making the back of his neck feel hot. He had never felt embarrassed by his parents before. He didn't even know how to feel that way. Already, a defensive voice whispered in his mind, "They're just trying to survive." It's clever, really, what they did. They had to do it, they didn't have a choice. But deep down, Draco knew exactly why they'd chosen this path instead of simply finding an empty flat and transfiguring some furnishings for themselves. He could almost hear his parents' amusement as they interacted with the Muggle, who would be under both the imperious curse and obliviation. They would take pleasure in dictating their demands and watching him bend over backward, dull-eyed, to comply. In their state of exile, it must have comforted them to manipulate a Muggle in this way, to know that even after everything, they still towered over the Muggle masses. "Look at that, Lucius," he could almost hear his mother say, cool and light. "They're good for something after all." Draco found he could no longer meet Hermione's gaze. She pressed on, "So, they spent 6 weeks exploring the wizarding spots in London under Transfiguration. Not anywhere as central as Diagon Alley or King's Cross, of course, but all those dozens of little outposts, like Circe Cleodna and the Office of Magical Postal Receipts, that sort of thing, looking for traces of you." "They didn't contact the Order for 6 weeks?" "No, apparently, they didn't want to risk it, considering that the remaining Order members were under such heavy surveillance. But then Tonks and Lupin went on the run, and I suppose they thought it was their last chance to leverage whatever was left of the Order's infrastructure. So, in early October, your mum caught Mr. Weasley outside the Ministry. She asked me to tell you that they'll be at a place called Halfhold Hill every Sunday morning between 8 and 9. Draco must have revealed something in his expression because Hermione added, "What?" "Nothing," Draco muttered. "Just. We used to have picnics there when I was 6 or 7. "Oh." Her gaze softened. "Was it nice?" "Yeah. It's really remote, so I'd ride this junior broom, and my dad would let out a kid snitch for me, you know, the slow ones. The size of bludgers." Hermione didn't quite manage a smile, and her expression held a knowing quality. She could sense the turmoil within him, the golden childhood memories clashing painfully against the reality he faced now, his father, who had laughed and cheered when a 6-year-old Draco caught that comically oversized snitch, would have shown no mercy to the girl sitting across from him in the Department of Mysteries. His mother, who had lovingly sent him gifts every week during his first 2 years at Hogwarts, had referred to Hermione as scum last year in Madame Malkin's. Draco's embarrassment deepened into bitter shame. For 17 years, he had yearned to emulate his parents, to be as poised as his mother and as influential as his father. He had always strived to make them proud, and for the most part, he had succeeded. But now he found himself questioning what they had truly taken pride in. Had they really been proud of what they had shaped, like an artist admiring their own creation? A sculpture, was that how they viewed him, proud of the job they'd done raising a pureblood with pureblood ideals? Looking back, he could see how meticulously they'd crafted his childhood, ensuring he never interacted with Muggles. He hadn't even had half-blood friends growing up. By the age of 8, he was already expressing the belief that only true wizards deserved to wield wands, convinced that witchcraft truly belonged to certain families. Everything about him had been groomed to fit perfectly into place. Draco wondered if they would still be proud of him now, as a blood traitor. Would they even love him? In this moment, it certainly felt like they'd never really trusted him, not in the same way Hermione or even Potter had. Hermione and Potter had faith in him to ask his own questions, to forge his own path, and this was the path he had chosen. He envisioned the manor burning, its dark skeleton exposed, crumbling piece by piece into the night. "You don't want to bring them here," Hermione said quietly. Draco felt his response stick in his throat. Of course, he wanted to say, "They're my parents," yet he found himself unable to voice those words. She was right, he dreaded their arrival. Merlin, he thought, disgusted with himself. He hadn't seen his parents in nearly half a year, and here he was, dreading taking them to a safe haven. Regardless of his anger and resentment, he knew they would have done anything for him. They would have died for him. What kind of son was he? But there was so much he wasn't ready for them to know. The role he had played in the manor's destruction, his involvement with the Order, and most importantly, the way his heart raced when his fingertips brushed along Hermione's collarbone. Their eyes locked, and he sensed she was thinking the same thing. "When they get here," she said quietly. "Well, obviously they won't like the idea of us being." She exhaled slowly. "It might be easier to stop." "Easier," Draco echoed, his mind racing. Draco struggled to comprehend her words. Since when did Hermione Granger care about what was easy? She always fought for what was right, what was just, often tying herself in knots without a second thought for the effort it took. But then he recognized that guarded look on her face, the same self-preservation that had caused her to shut him out back in November. This wasn't about ease, it was about the anticipation of pain, and she was right to expect it. He knew that his parents' reactions wouldn't just affect him, they would extend to her as well. "They're not going to say anything to you," he said, his voice strained. "I won't." He hesitated. "You won't let them?" Hermione raised her eyebrows, and the words sounded absurd when she voiced them. Draco felt heat rise in his cheeks. He had no idea how he could stop them. Yell? Cast a tongue-tying hex? He didn't know, but he found himself saying, "Yeah, I won't let them." A small smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. "How, exactly? You got the Weasleys to keep quiet about me, didn't you?" He could see her smile widen. "Yes, well, that was nothing." It didn't feel like nothing. He brushed his palm against her jaw, and she tilted her face just the way he liked, allowing his hand to rest perfectly against the contour of her cheek. Her eyes were dark and dilated, and he felt an odd, yawning sensation deep within him, a mix of yearning and disbelief. Hermione had protected him, and in that moment, he knew he would do the same for her. All he cared about was getting through this together, staying this close. Then, without thinking, Draco kissed her, fiercely. She tasted like toothpaste, and as she pressed against him, her arm slipped around his waist, pulling him even closer into the darkness. Their legs tangled together, fitting perfectly, and Draco's heart raced. He realized he had no idea what he would have done if she had demanded they end this. There was no going back to the way things had been, previously unimagined force. It had taken so much for him to arrive at this moment, to feel the whirlwind of emotions swirling within him, not just the exhilaration, but also the pain and confusion that accompanied it. He felt no joy in the shame he carried for his parents, and the weight of guilt from the manor incident still lingered at the edges of his consciousness. He held Hermione tightly, overwhelmed by the words he longed to express, feelings that felt too vast to articulate, a pressure building within him that was almost suffocating. But he had fought hard to embrace these emotions, and he couldn't turn back now, not when he was finally starting to find his way. Meanwhile, Bellatrix set the Daily Prophet down on an end table and stared into the flickering flames of the fire. She was alone in the Lestrange home, as Rodolphus had gone to St. Mungo's. His lungs had always been weak, and the smoke had only exacerbated his condition. It was yet another inconvenience, however. As she reflected on the day's events, she felt a sense of satisfaction. At first, the burning of the manor and the escape of the mudblood girl had infuriated her, and she couldn't shake the suspicion that one of her accomplices had been Potter in disguise, but that was a secret she would keep from the Dark Lord. With time to contemplate what had transpired, she realized that it ultimately served the Dark Lord's interests. The Mudblood and her friends had likely broken into the manor to rescue the wand maker and the Lovegood girl. But neither hostage was a significant loss. The Dark Lord had taken what he needed from the wand maker, and the Lovegood man remained under their control, thanks to Selwyn and Travers's persuasion. Yes, Crabbe's foolish boy, the one responsible for burning the manor and taking lives, had inadvertently given them a gift. A few insignificant lives were a small price to pay for this, the first step toward reshaping the Dark Lord's image, a plan they had been devising for months. Soon, he would emerge into the sunlight, both feared and revered, like a force previously unimaginable. God, once Potter was dead and the nation was under control, the wizarding world would finally embrace the glory of a new era. With the Dark Lord at the helm and she, his most loyal servant, ready to execute his every plan, wizardkind could unite for the next great mission, the conquest of Muggles. Bella had been reveling in satisfaction all day. The Skeeter woman had done well, she would be rewarded, but one thing still nagged at her thoughts, one small flaw. The Parkinson girl's memories were steeped in emotion, perhaps even distorted by it, yet Bella could still hear a voice cutting through the chaos of spells. It had sounded like her nephew. Something about the eyes, too. She had respected the fervor of Sissy's son the previous year. He had been loyal, driven more by fear and cowardice than genuine devotion. That much was true. She had sensed it in his mind when she taught him a clemency. Still, he had managed to infiltrate Hogwarts in a way no other Death Eater had. Bella could always appreciate ingenuity in the service of the Dark Lord. Yet this suspicion felt like madness. She had seen the body herself at the funeral. And yet, the boy had supposedly died in the company of Albus Dumbledore, one of the few wizards who could perform such an exact act of transfiguration, and that spell would have held as long as the old fool lived. Bella hadn't voiced her doubts even to her husband. If, by some freak occurrence, her nephew were alive, his deception would tarnish her by association. Rage surged within her. Her blood was pure, her intent was pure, and yet she had already lost one sister to blood treachery. How could she bear the shame of another betrayal within her own family? She knew the Dark Lord would judge her for the faults of her bloodline. So would they all. No, it was better to keep her suspicions to herself, to investigate them alone. Bellatrix rose, and with a swirl of her cloak, she disapparated, finding herself in a graveyard, where the pebbled path crunched beneath her feet, glimmering in the starlight. No need to worry, she reassured herself. The Parkinson girl's memory was clouded by her emotions, that's all. She had spun herself a pretty little lie. Yet, as she drew closer to the Malfoy's gray marble crypt, her footsteps quickened. Entering the small chamber, she was struck by its immaculate cleanliness. The prowling dragons and chimeras carved into the high ceiling gleamed as if freshly hewn from marble. The floor sparkled beneath her as she moved to the farthest corner, where an inscription caught her eye: Draco Lucius Malfoy, beloved son, born June 5, 1980, died June 30, 1997. With a flick of her wand, a fissure split the center of the marble facade, and the two halves swung open like double doors. Another flick, and the coffin levitated out, long and dark, its lacquered surface shining. She felt a thin sheen of sweat coat her palms. Her gaze drifted to Lucius's crypt, then to Narcissa's. Yes, best to check all three, to set her mind at ease completely. She opened one facade, then the next, until the three coffins stood before her. Bellatrix flicked her wand again, and the lids of the coffins rose. Outside, a murder of crows took flight, their frantic wings punctuating the air as a scream of fury tore through the night.